settle down, we are going to start the first panel. May I request everyone to take your seat? Let's begin the first panel of the 4th Geneva Forum. The first panel will discuss and deliberate on social and cultural rights violations by China. So may I invite the chairperson of the panel, Mr. Kama Chui, Secretary for Department of Information and International Relations, Central Tibetan Administration, and the panel is Tenchi Gyatsola, Interim Vice President, International Campaign for Tibet, Dr. Michael Van Wolt Van Praag, Executive President of Krita and Senior Fellow of the Songpak Center for Advanced International Legal Studies, Dolkun Isa, President World Uyghur Congress, and Solomon Gerard Hatagin, Secretary, International Human Rights Center for Mongolians. Please, Mr. Chairperson and the panelists, kindly take your seat. I shall hand over the dice to the Chairperson, Secretary Kamachila now.
Very good morning to all. Welcome and today the first panel discussion that we are having today. So the topic for the first panel discussion is the violations of social and cultural rights by China. And I have with me four eminent panelists, Dr. Michael La, Tenchi Gyatsola, Mr. Dolkun Isa, and Ms. Solomon Hatagin from Southern Mongolia. So I welcome all the panelists and other eminent invitees, special guests, chief guests, and others in attendance. So let me begin by requesting our first speaker, Ms. Tenchi Gyatsola, to begin her presentation. And before I do that, I would like to give you a short introduction of Ms. Tenchi Gyatsola. Ms. Tenchi Gyatsola is the interim Vice President and Director of Outreach at the International Campaign for Tibet. Born as a Tibetan refugee in the small hill town of Dharamsala, India, the seat of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the exiled Tibetan administration, she was educated at the Tibetan Children's Village School, Dharamsala, and St. Bede's College in Shimla, India. She served as an elected member of the Tibetan Parliament in exile for 2 terms, 1991 to 1997, during which time she traveled widely to the Tibetan settlements in India to strengthen understanding of democratic system of exiled Tibetan government and to speak on Tibet to various governmental and NGO groups in Europe and the United States. After moving to the United States in 1998, she continued her activism as a private individual and also served as a community leader and event organizer in raising awareness about Tibet. She joined the staff of the International Campaign for Tibet, based in Washington, D.C. as Special Assistant for Advocacy in 2008. At ICT, she expressed her activism to spotlight Tibet through working to organize annual Tibet lobby action days at the U.S. Congress, Tibetan American Youth Leadership Training Programs, and ICT member outreach through numerous talks, events, and engagement programs. With this, I would request Tenzula to begin your presentation, please.
Thank you, Kamachina. Thank you for that kind introduction, and greetings to everyone. Thank you also for the invitation to the Geneva Forum and to be on this panel here. It's really an honor to be here, to be joining you here. I've watched the forum take shape over the years, and certainly it plays an important role in putting a spotlight on our issue. So I have a PowerPoint. I'm trying to figure out how I run this. Thank you. Thank you. Technically challenged a little bit. Okay. So I'd like to start by saying we had fabulous speakers this morning. Hong Sikong elaborated a lot on the history and status of Tibet today. So I want to go in by saying Tibet is a country with a 2,000-year recorded history that China has occupied for more than 60 years since forcing the Dalai Lama into exile. Tibet today is tied with Syria as the least free country on earth, according to watchdog Freedom House. And the basic premise and guiding principle of Chinese rule in Tibet has been the narrative that Tibetans are backward, Tibetan culture is inferior, and Tibetans in particular, those of nomadic backgrounds, are socio-economically backward and leading unproductive lives. The Chinese leadership's goal has been to undermine and repress Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan culture, identity, and replace it with what China believes is modern socialist culture. All resistance is met with heavy-handed repression and grave consequences. The International Campaign for Tibet, together with the Loyola School of Law, has submitted a detailed report on the implementation of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, with a particular focus on Tibet on the occasion of the 68th Pre-Sessional Working Group in March 2021. I want to highlight some points from that report along with some additional information. So the first point I want to make is Tibetans as a second-class citizen. The system in Tibet is such that the Chinese Communist Party has all the power. In 2020, International Campaign for Tibet documented in a detailed report titled Position Without Power, Tibetan Representation in the Chinese Administrative System, that non-Tibetans hold every party position at the provincial level in Tibetan areas, as well as the majority of party positions at the prefecture level in all Tibetan areas. It is clear that throughout Tibet, all the critically and strategically important positions are held by non-Tibetans. 2 weeks ago, China announced the appointment of Wang Junzheng as the new party secretary in the Tibet Autonomous Regional Committee. Wang is on the sanctions list of the EU, the US, Canada, and UK for human rights violations in Xinjiang, East Turkestan. This appointment indicates that the Chinese authorities intend to continue using an iron fist to control the Tibetan people. Next point I want to make is forced resettlement of Tibetan nomads. Since the beginning of the so-called Western Development Strategy around 1999, and partly before, the Chinese government has been systematically implementing policies of settlement, land confiscation, and fencing of pastoral areas in Tibet. Human Rights Watch reported between 2006 and 2012, over 2 million Tibetans have been rehoused and hundreds of thousands of nomadic herders have been relocated and settled in new socialist villages. In 2014, this push to urbanize nomadic Tibetans was formalized by the adoption of the National New Type Urbanization Plan. Leading scholars have coined the term urban site. Ironically, it should be noted there is no clear data to support the Chinese claim that resettlement benefits the grassland ecosystem. In fact, the opposite holds true. The threat to Tibet's fragile ecosystem does not come from Tibetan nomads, but is fundamentally exacerbated by Beijing's development policies. Additionally, in 2020, a detailed research by scholar Adrian Zenz, who I believe you'll be hearing from tomorrow, indicated the subjection of Tibetans to coercive labor programs that entail military-style political indoctrination, training, and assignment to workplaces. Against this backdrop, it should be noted that there is no avenue available for Tibetans to seek any kind of legal remedies against orders to relocate, settle, to seek repeal of relevant state measures, to advance claims for proper compensation, or to seek legal redress for lost properties. These are all unheard of. Sinicization of Tibetan culture and language. Tibetans continue to be stigmatized in mainstream Han society due to their appearance and non-standard accents. In fact, Tibetan culture is not taught in the classroom curriculum, which is focused primarily on Han Chinese history and cultural values. Since 2004, an increasingly alarming number of Tibetan adolescents are sent to boarding schools away from their hometowns and villages. The parent goal is to sever students' affective and cultural bonds with their native homelands while instilling Chinese Communist Party and Han-defined norms and values. Mandarin has replaced Tibetan as a medium of instruction. Since the 1990s, there has been a clear shift from Tibetan medium education to Mandarin as the main medium of instruction. In the 6 years between 2001 and 2007, Mandarin replaced Tibetan as the language of education in Tibet, and 95% of all Tibet Autonomous Region primary schools employ Chinese medium instruction. The impact of PRC's policies on the Tibetan language extends beyond the classroom. Current PRC authorities consider the use of Tibetan language to be a separatist activity. Groups that organize Tibetan classes are branded as criminal gangs connected to separate forces of the Dalai Lama, and private Tibetan language classes have also been closed down. In 2015, government notice warning says illegal associations formed in the name of Tibetan language, the environment, and education is one of the 20 illegal activities related to the independence of Tibet. Sinicization of religion. Perhaps yet, the strongest example of sinicization is the PRC campaign against Tibetan Buddhism and its practice. President Xi Jinping declared that institutions and the clergy should serve the state's highest interests by keeping leadership and core values of the CCP and state socialism as greater than the religious canon. One of the pervasive measures that have been used by authorities along these lines is the re-education campaigns where Tibetans are forced to profess their devotion to the CCP and required to denounce and slander the Dalai Lama. Tibetans are also often restricted from religious sites and prohibited from celebrating days of religious significance. Similarly, permission to attend international religious events and to partake in pilgrimages, both inside and outside of Tibet, are severely restricted. Finally, the biggest perceived threat that China has against its control over Tibet is His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama and Tibetan Buddhist leaders in general. In 2007, the Chinese government put in place rules and regulations to determine how Tibetan reincarnated lamas are selected and appointed. It should be clear that any Chinese intervention in the sacred tradition of selection of Tibetan Buddhist leaders, including most importantly a future 15th Dalai Lama, will be rejected by Tibetan people both inside and outside Tibet. We have seen this already with the imposition of a state-installed Panchen Lama who does not command the respect of the Tibetan people. And I think you will hear in more detail on this topic from Zikib Rinpoche and others later today. With these, the International Campaign for Tibet offers the following recommendations. We call on the Chinese government to fully respect international human rights standards, in particular the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which it has ratified. We call on the Chinese government to end discrimination against Tibetans, to end policies of Sinicization of religion and of culture, including the repression of Tibetan Buddhism and coercive labor and settlement policies. We call on the Chinese government to respect the right to self-determination of the Tibetan people. We call on the international community, states and governments to counter the narratives of the Chinese government which claim to develop Tibetans and to understand the real nature of CCP policies in Tibet. We call on the international community in a sense of urgency to press for the end of policies of Sinicization of Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan culture. We call on the United Nations Human Rights Council to implement the unprecedented call of more than 50 independent UN human rights experts from June of 2020 that called for the establishment of an independent monitoring mechanism on the People's Republic of China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tenchula, for your presentation on the social and cultural rights violations by China in Tibet. And next speaker that I have with me is Dr. Michael, One World, One Prague. And I would like to give a quick introduction to Dr. Michael. Dr. Michael, One World, One Prague is an international lawyer, mediator, advisor in interstate peace processes, and professor of international law and international relations. He served as UN senior legal advisor to the Foreign Minister of East Timor during the country's transition to independence, and as legal advisor to the Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama from 1985 to 2011. He was appointed visiting professor of modern international relations and international law at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton from 2011 to 2015, and taught at the universities in Rome, Delhi, San Francisco, and Monterey. From 1991 to 1998, Dr. Michael served as the General Secretary of the Unrepresented Nation and People's Organization headquartered in The Hague. He has practiced law, including public international law, with law offices of Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering, now Wilmer Hall in Washington, D.C. and London, and of Petit and Martin in San Francisco. His publications include Tibet Brief 2020, co-authored with Meg Bolges in 2020, Sacred Mandates, Asian International Relations since Genghis Khan, co-authored and edited with Timothy Brook and Meg Bolges in 2018, and the implementation of right to self-determination as a contribution of conflict prevention, report of the International Conference of Experts, 21st to 27 November 1998, UNESCO, Division of Human Rights, Democracy and Peace, UNESCO Center of Catalonia, Barcelona 1999, and Status of Tibet, History, Rights and Prospects in International Law, Westview 1987. With this, I would like to ask question and would request Dr. Michael to start his presentation of deliberations. So the question I would be posing would be, there is evidence that genocide and or cultural genocide has been committed and is being committed against Uyghur Tibetans by the Communist Chinese government and the party. How does this affect those people's right to self-determination?
Well, thank you first very much for this very extensive introduction and for inviting me to this conference and in particular to this panel. I think with what is happening internationally, especially the way that countries and their governments are reassessing their relationship with China, reassessing their policies in relation to China, this is a very timely thing to be looking at. So thank you for your question on genocide and genocidal policies, both in East Turkestan and in relation to Tibet, and how that relates to self-determination. I'm particularly interested in addressing today the issue of self-determination because in the first place it's the very first article of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and it is an article that is very often ignored when we talk about human rights. It's the very first article both of that covenant and the other international human rights covenant, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And it is for a very good reason that it's been placed as the first article of both these covenants. Not only because, as you know, in the Charter of the UN, the principle of self-determination is placed also in the first article of the UN Charter as the basic principle for peaceful relations among nations, but because it is actually a human right in itself. By having placed it in the covenants, in the international covenants of human rights, the right to self-determination has become, at least since 1960, if not earlier, a human right. And so it is a human right that we should be considering when we consider violations of human rights by China in these places that we're looking at. Also, and perhaps even more importantly, because, and this also has to do with the reason that it is put as the very first article of both these covenants, because the realization of the right to self-determination is considered a prerequisite to the enjoyment of all the other rights that we're discussing today. In the Committee on Human Rights, which oversees the implementation of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, has stated very clearly that it is that the right to self-determination, and this first article that we're talking about, and I quote, is of particular importance because its realization is an essential condition for the effective guarantee and observance of individual human rights and for the promotion and strengthening of those rights. It is for that reason that states set forth the right to self-determination in a provision of positive law in both covenants, and placed this provision as Article 1 apart from and before the other rights of the two covenants. And the right to self-determination is considered an essential condition, using their language, because when people are subjected to the kind of oppression we're talking about, its members of the people that have the right to self-determination are not really able to enjoy their individual human rights. So the right to self-determination applies first and foremost, as you know, to colonies and trust territories, and to people, or peoples rather, under alien subjugation, domination, and exploitation. And those words are important. It applies, therefore, for example, to states that have been invaded and provides them with the right to re-establish their independence. And the human rights dimension of self-determination has broadened this concept of the application of self-determinations and the meaning of peoples under alien subjugation, domination, and exploitation to cover any form of alien administration that is oppressive. Now, the Chinese people struggled for and exercised self-determination in 1911 when they overthrew the alien Manchu Qing rule and created their own Chinese state, the first one in some 300 years. They did so again when they freed themselves from colonial and imperialist intrusion. But the people of East Turkestan, including Uyghurs, who have been under alien domination for much of their modern history, except for brief periods of de facto independence, have been denied the right to exercise their self-determination. And Tibetan people, who ruled themselves in their own independent state, but were invaded and occupied by the People's Republic of China, as we've heard today again, almost immediately after the creation of the PRC, have been under alien subjugation, domination, and exploitation ever since. Now, I limit my remarks today to these peoples and regions under PRC rule because I don't, at this time, have sufficient expertise to talk about the right to self-determination as it applies to Hong Kong, as it applies to southern Mongolia, or any other areas. But I don't want this to be interpreted as meaning that I do not believe that these peoples have a right to self-determination. Whether or not the grounds for their right to self-determination are similar or different from those of Tibetans and East Turkestanis. So I think we should talk, and we must talk, and talk about and condemn the violations of economic, social, and cultural rights by the PRC in Tibet and East Turkestan, as we're doing today. But let's be very conscious that these violations are all direct consequences and, in fact, just symptoms of the PRC's violation of a much more fundamental right, the right to self-determination of Tibetans and of the people of East Turkestan. And as long as the PRC is permitted to continue denying those peoples the exercise of their right to self-determination, and is instead allowed to pursue precisely the opposite objective, namely absolute control and assimilation of those peoples, as we've heard, the sinification, the violation of economic, social, and cultural and other rights will continue, despite international expressions of concern. I mean, haven't we learned this over the past 70 years of human rights violations and the expressions of international concern regarding Tibet, but also regarding East Turkestan. The historical and political situation of Tibet and East Turkestan are clearly distinct, and the histories of both regions are in many ways different. So, as a result, to some extent, the grounds for their respective rights to self-determination may also differ. Under international law, Tibetans are an occupied people, and Tibet is an occupied country. Beijing is obligated under international law to end its occupation. I'll be addressing this as well as the consequences of this and of the status of Tibet tomorrow when we discuss some of the findings of the book, Tibet Brief 2020. And so today I'd like to only focus on the other almost self-evident ground for the Tibetan people's right to self-determination. Namely, the Tibetans' subjugation, domination, and exploitation by an alien power, China, and the indisputably oppressive nature of the PRC rule, the criteria for the exercise of the right to self-determination. And let's not forget that the Tibetan right to self-determination has been recognized by the United Nations itself, by the General Assembly of the UN. And as Sikyong said this morning, it was recognized. The fact that it has not been implemented does not mean that this recognition has been withdrawn. That resolution exists. That resolution still is awaiting implementation. The people of East Turkestan, comprising Uyghurs and others, similarly possess the right to self-determination on this ground, on the ground of being subjugated, dominated, exploited by an alien power, China. And I furthermore submit that both Tibet and East Turkestan are currently under a rule that is colonial in nature. International law is unequivocal in its rejection of, and I quote, colonialism in all its forms and manifestations, end of quote. And I think we'd be hard-pressed to not consider Chinese rule in Tibet and East Turkestan to be in some form or manifestation of colonial rule. And this too triggers a legal requirement and an obligation to permit the subjugated people, the Tibetans and the East Turkestanis, to exercise their right to self-determination and to do so without delay. The issue is urgent, as international law tolerates no excuse for delaying the process of decolonization and therefore of self-determination. And this is where your question is very important, because the oppressive nature of the Chinese rule in Tibet and in East Turkestan cannot be made more clear than through the evidence of the genocidal policies that have and continue to be practiced there, and the policies of sinicization in both. China itself, of course, as you know, has been a consistent proponent of decolonization, for which China should be commended. In fact, I think only weeks ago, China introduced and managed to have a resolution passed in the UN to end all continuing vestiges of colonialism. But then let China itself not be exempt from the duty to decolonize. Now, the Chinese government's response to what I've just said today will be twofold. In the first place, that Tibet and East Turkestan have always been parts of China, or in some versions since antiquity. And I will discuss this claim in regard to Tibet tomorrow in the morning session, and so I don't want to dwell on it now. For now, I'll simply say that in both cases, these are false claims based on false and misleading historical narratives. And secondly, the Chinese government will say that the PRC has liberated Tibetans from backward, oppressive, and feudal Tibetan rule and from foreign imperialism, and that it liberated East Turkestan from oppressing Kuomintang rule and Russian intrusion, most probably. The PRC government will tell us that the Chinese Communist Party, as Tensha has already mentioned, have developed, modernized, educated, reformed, and uplifted Tibet and East Turkestan, their economies and their people. Seriously? Coming from a former colonial power myself, the Netherlands, which doesn't make me proud, I can assure you that these are the identical arguments that all colonial powers have again and again used to justify their hold on alien territory and to delay decolonization. This is nothing new. The great civilizing missions. And it's precisely for this reason that the United Nations General Assembly, in its principal resolutions on colonialism and decolonization, which today, by the way, reflect customary international law, expressly reject any pretext to continue colonial domination or to delay decolonization. Also, given that under international law, peoples with the right to self-determination alone, only they own and may dispose of the natural resources of their territory, the PRC is prohibited today from exploiting and profiting from those natural resources. And by the way, so are all other states in the international community, prohibited from benefiting from the extraction and exploitation of the resources of Tibet. Now, the issue is not even whether the colonial power, the occupying power, or the otherwise alien power builds roads, railways, schools, hospitals, stadiums, nor whether it does so for its own benefit or even for the benefit of the populations of those territories. Colonialism and I emphasize this, all other forms and manifestations of subjugation, domination, and exploitation by an alien power are reprehensible, racist, painful, and altogether illegal. And the international community has a duty, not just a moral imperative, has a legal duty and an interest to see that such oppressive regimes come to an end in places like Tibet and East Turkestan, and do so without delay. And this, I think, is the critical and foundational issue. And not prioritizing it, and instead focusing only on other, mostly individual rights of Tibetans, of Uyghurs, and others under alien Chinese communist rule, is quite frankly like asking your neighbor, who for years keeps his wife in chains, in captivity, in the cellar, to stop beating her when she cries for help, while you do nothing to bring about her release. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Michael, for your very captivating, comprehensive discussion on the right to self-determination under international law, and particularly the people of Tibet and East Turkestan deserve right to self-determination under the international law at all costs. And the China's justification to rule Tibet, Mongolia, southern Mongolia, and East Turkestan are meaningless under any circumstances under the international law. Thank you very much for your discussion and presentation. Next speaker that I have with me is Mr. Dolgun Issa. Mr. Dolgun Issa is a former student leader of pro-democracy demonstration in East Turkestan in 1988. After having endured persecution at the hands of Chinese government, Mr. Issa fled China in 1994 and sought asylum in Europe and acquired German citizenship in 2006. Currently, he is the president of the World Uyghur Congress and vice president of the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, UNPO. He has consistently advocated for the rights of the Uyghur people and has raised the issue in the United Nations, the institution of the European Union, and in individual states and other international fora. So may I request Mr. Dolgun Issa to proceed with your presentation, please.
Thank you, Karna. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just so glad to meet here so many Tibetan activists, my old friends. Since 2 years, we are all virtual meeting, but it is the first meeting. It's so nice. Really. We miss each other, and also I'm so glad to meet here with Prime Minister Pampar, some other honorable guests. I'm so happy, and I would like to thank Tibet Office to invite me to speak and at this Geneva Forum and highlight how social and cultural right of Uyghur people in Turkestan have been systematically violated by the Chinese government. Discussing this topic comes at an important time. For example, Uyghur forced labor is tainting global supply chain in the sector such as garment and solar panel industry, making this violation a global topic of concern. However, Uyghur forced labor is only part of many of violation of Uyghur economic, social, and cultural rights. If we look at the International Convention of the Economic, Social, Cultural Right, we see China has violated many of those rights. This starts with the very first article of the General Prevention Right to Self-Determination. Michael already very good explained everything on this. Ever since the occupation of Turkestan by Chinese Communist Army in 1949 and the established so-called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in 1955, Beijing has failed to uphold its promise that Uyghur would enjoy certain level of autonomy, such as to determine economic, political, and cultural matters. In fact, the Chinese government has effectively criminalized any action perceived to be promoting to rights of determination, often imprisoning Uyghur of false charge separatism, which also often kind linked to terrorism charges. Chinese government has dramatically increased its repression in Turkestan since September 11, 2001 terrorist attack in New York. Unfortunately, Chinese government has used the international war on terror as a pretext to crack down further on the Uyghur people. It was easy for China to label Uyghur as a terrorist because Uyghur happen to be Muslims. Chinese government has launched numerous strike hard campaigns on Uyghur, has arrested and detained thousands of peaceful Uyghur activists, and has executed 100 dissident and religious figures, accusing them as a terrorist and a separatist. China officially, December 2003, issues a big list, 11 individuals in exile, 4 Uyghur organizations as a terrorist. I'm number 1 of them. My name was number 3 of this terrorist list, but unfortunately I have never seen a real gun in the bomb in my lifetime. But China blames terrorists because trying to stop all activism. Because of this, and because of the red notes, China also and puts my name as red notes. I was suffering more than 21 years. I was detained in so many countries, even in Switzerland, in front of the UN, 2005. And Italy, 2017. Well, yeah, for China, for years, China have been trying to associate the Uyghur with Taliban to brand them with terrorism. But today, we are all witnessing China was first country to support Taliban. Further, China's violation of Uyghur right to non-discrimination is providing the backbone with its genocidal policy. In the last 5 years particularly, we have witnessed strategy of the Chinese government shift from cultural assimilation and the social re-engineering to ethnic cleansing and the genocidal policy to the Uyghur, Kazakh, other ethnic people in East Turkestan. Everything makes the Uyghur people unique, or language, religion, culture has been targeted. The young generation Uyghur is being targeted particularly for indoctrination. Today, Chinese Communist Party has arbitrarily detained millions of, we don't know exact number, but we estimate at least 3 million Uyghur people, Uyghurs in so-called re-education camp, whereas they are forced to renounce their ethnic, cultural, religious identity. In this concentration camp, Uyghurs are subject horrific form maltreatment. Camp survivor has described systematic torture, rape, and other forms of the sexual violence, forced operation, sterilization, as well as forced labor. These detentions are extra-legal with no legal representation allowed through the process of the arrested. Numerous of other rights enshrined in the Convention of the Economic, Social, Cultural Rights are being violated as a part of the Chinese government's genocidal campaign against Uyghur and the other Turkic people. In violation of the rights of economic, one significant factor of China's continued interest in Turkestan has been its abundance of natural resources. More than 1/3 of petroleum reserve and 2/3 gold reserve of China in East Turkestan. Gold, uranium, copper, other metals, minerals are also very abundant. East Turkestan is the biggest cotton producing region in China. 85% cotton in China and 22% in globally from forced labor in East Turkestan today. It is also one of the top 3 meat producers in China. Despite wealth of East Turkestan, more than 90% Uyghurs, Kazakh, and other local Muslims still live below poverty line. Because of economic powers, only the Chinese and Chinese people, the natural resources are used to serve only needs the exploiting Chinese population. It does not benefit to the Uyghur and the other at all. In violation of the right of education, the Chinese authority has implemented various policies over the past year that forced Uyghur children to receive education in Mandarin, leaving very little room for them to learn Uyghur language, only at home. To facilitate this, there has been substantial influence of Chinese teachers encouraged to relocate to the region to work, while Uyghur teachers are fired and not able to find a job in education. A directive was issued by the Education Department of Hotan Prefecture in East Turkestan 2017, outlawing to use Uyghur language for the school children and at all education level from primary to secondary school. Even break time also cannot use the mother tongue. In violation of the right of culture, in Chinese authorities have damaged or completely destroyed enormously tangible expression of the Uyghur culture and the religious heritage. Large-scale mosque destruction began late 2016 and the scope mosque rectification program through which Chinese authorities have conducted systematic campaign demolished discrete place on the worship. According to the report, Australian Strategic Policy Institute, 65% of all mosques in Turkestan has been destroyed and or damaged. It is saying is 8,000 mosques completely destroyed, another 8,000 mosques partly destroyed. And also 30% of important Islamic sacred sites have been demolished, and additionally 28% have been damaged in some way. Beyond large public structures, the campaign has also been extended to Uyghurs' home.
building on more invasive program aimed at the personal life's private freedoms. 2017, Chinese government sent at least 2 million Chinese Communist Party's members to the Uyghur home, staying with you together and eating together and monitoring you 24 hours. Moreover, through the policy of forced sterilization and the population control targeting Uyghur women in the East Turkestan, Chinese government has fighted protects both women and children. This policy apparently appears to aim to significantly diminish the Uyghur population. As I mentioned before, the issue of Uyghur forced labor stands out as one of the most concerning for the world at large. A key feature of the government's program against Uyghur is use forced compulsory labor in all around concentration camp, prison, workplace across the region. Despite significant barriers to obtaining information, investigation have shown that widespread use forced labor as a mean social control of this policy creates significant risk of the forced labor at all workplaces, industrial and agricultural in East Turkestan. Chinese authorities are also transferring Uyghur workers to other parts of China where they work, export factories under conditions that also strongly indicate forced labor. As China is second largest economic power globally, this has implication for the entire international community. Many products that we buy today in the West are connected to the Uyghur forced labor. Adidas, Volkswagen, and so many. iPhone, yeah. To address these issues, therefore, require a global effort. China has been able to extend its persecution and violation beyond the border of East Turkestan through brutal campaign to threaten, harass, and intimidate dissidents living abroad. Uyghur activists in diaspora regularly receive phone calls from Chinese agents who are demanding us to end our activism or requesting us to spy on others. On numerous occasions, have Chinese authorities attempted to prevent my personally for speaking at the event or international institution like United Nations. I was also kicked out from the UN 2017 in New York. Even though we live in democratic country, China's long arm reached us everywhere, requiring us to be constantly vigilant and fearful of our own safety. Chinese government does not shy away from the threatening or attacking of family and the loved one who remain in East Turkestan. My personal experience is one of the many examples. In the last 3 years, I have lost my parents. My 78-year-old mom died in one of the concentration camps in 2018. In January 2020, I found that my father had also died under mysterious circumstances. Still, I don't know where he passed away. I found out from the CCP propaganda article attacking me. They forced my older sister and several other family members to denounce me and the video which they published online. I had not able to see my parents over the 25 years. I had not been able to hear the voice more than 4 years. No, I will never will again. Recently, Chinese authorities have sentenced my younger brother to life imprisonment to attempt to be silent. My older brother, he's a mathematics professor, where is about, remain unknown, I don't know, but I got some news recently, he was sentenced 24 years. Not a day goes by that I don't worry my family well-being. For more than 2 years, we have been calling to the International Olympic Committee to move games. OSCE has been ignoring to call and concerning. In this context, that less than 100 days today, the Beijing Winter 22 Olympic Games will open. According to the OSCE and the Chinese government, the Olympic Game will be open and inclusive and create harmony world and promote social progress. This could not be farther from the truth. For those living under repressive Chinese rule, their reality is everything but inclusive, open and harmonious, in its they experience brutal crackdown fundamental freedom. When China received the hosting right 2008 Summer Olympic Games, it did everything in its power to make sure it was the most successful one in the history of the Olympics. But in reality, it has exploited migrant workers, severely cracked down on the dissident in Tibetan, East Turkestan, increased censorship, create propaganda machine around the Olympics, and the pollution, the air to prepare for the games. It used this opportunity to strip up nationalist favor and distract the entire world from its authoritarian regime. This time, we are in the face of the genocide. Along the China host the upcoming Winter Games is undermining core purpose of the Olympic movement. It sent out clear message to China, to the international community that OEC emboldens a repressive regime and the genocide policy. We have to call international community to value human rights over the money and the opportunity. We must defend core values that we are so dear to all democratic freedom and avoid being associated with the genocidal Olympics. Only through concrete action can China be held accountable. The international community can not longer hide it behind empty statements. So far, United Nations Human Rights Council and just a country is make statement is a good step, but we haven't seen any real concrete action. So must act swiftly to end the ongoing genocide. It is false to do so. Uyghur, Tibet, Southern Mongolian, Hong Kongers people, along with its cultural, language, religious, as a risk of being destroyed. More need to be done. United Nations. So far, today is 3 million Uyghur is suffering concentration camp. Million Uyghur children separated from the family, and the China all information and shows very clearly what's going on for the Uyghur is 21st century. Never again is happening again today. But we haven't seen a single statement by the Secretary General of the United Nations. He is all the time is to support Chinese policy, unfortunately. And even not single resolution passed, almost 5 years is genocide going on from the Human Rights Council. Yeah. UN mission is to create a better world. A world with absolutely no discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation. Better world should mean a free, democratic world. There are no camps, no forced labor factory, no cultural, religious repression, no arbitrary arrested, no policy brutality. A world without genocide, a better world. So it is a time we all together, all human beings, should stand together with Uyghur, Tibet, Southern Mongolia, Hong Kongers, should be protect the core value. Today, China not only threatened for the Uyghur, Tibet, Hong Kongs, and today Chinese Communist Party already threat global democracy, human rights. China's long arm is reaching everywhere. China misuse Interpol and United Nations and manipulates all the international system. So it is a time every human being, every country must be back up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Issa, for sharing with us the detailed account of economic, social, and cultural rights violations by China in East Turkestan and how Chinese, the government, the People's Republic of China, the Communist Party oppress the people of East Turkestan like they do with the Tibetan people, and also sharing with us how they target the activists like yourself and others, not only personally but your families are also being targeted by the Communist Party of China. So as you said, we always stand in solidarity with people of East Turkestan, Hong Kong, people of South Mongolia, and thank you very much for your presentation and for your presentation, sir. So now, next speaker that we have with us is Miss Solomon Grell Hatagin from southern Mongolia. She is currently a doctoral student at the University of Bern. She is committee member of Association Mongol Diffuse Roman. Since this year, she has been serving as secretary of the International Human Rights Center for Mongolians. So may I request Ms. Thormon Hatagin to begin your presentation.
Thank you very much, Karma, for your introduction. I would like to correct one thing. I come from Mongolia, independent nation, and northern neighbor of China.
Okay.
And although southern Mongolia is now part of China, we as Mongolians have same language and same culture. We are all have same roots. Good morning, dear distinguished guests, speakers, fellow panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to be here representing Southern Mongolians as well as Mongolians to talk about endangered language and culture for the 4th Geneva Forum organized by Office of Tibet Geneva and Department of Information and International Relations, Tibet. The International Human Rights Center for Mongolians was established in 2021 in Geneva with a mission to protect the economic, cultural, and political rights of all Mongolians in the world. Our organization is in accord with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and UNESCO Declaration concerning the intentional destruction of cultural heritage. Mongolian language and Mongolian script are cultural heritage and means of self-expression of Mongolians. Mongolian script is the one script that writes top to down and left to right. By this sense, it is a world heritage. Like other cultural elements elsewhere, Mongolian script was attacked before. The most recent one in history is using the Cyrillic alphabet in Mongolia under the Soviet Union-friendly communist regime that began in 1946. So the official use of the Mongolian script declined and stopped. However, people and scholars of that time continued to utilize Mongolian script. For example, my grandfather had written in Mongolian script regularly and so left us a memory of it. Meanwhile, southern Mongolians preserved their heritage and used Mongolian script actively, passing it on to their children. However, over the last decade, there have been systematic step-by-step attacks to Mongolian language in southern Mongolia. Also, what's happening in Tibet and Uyghur, or East Turkestan, seems to be part of China's broader campaign of wiping out so-called minority language to promote Chinese as the single common language across China. In southern Mongolia, the official euphemism of this campaign is second-generation bilingual education. Starting last September, the medium of instruction has been switched from Mongolian to Chinese in all Mongolian schools, sparking a region-wide mass protest. After cracking down on the protest, what the government of China is implementing in southern Mongolia is full-blown cultural genocide, aiming to eradicate the national identity of the entire southern Mongolian population. Speak Chinese and become a civilized person is the official slogan publicly advertised everywhere in southern Mongolia, from TV broadcasts to street billboards, from classrooms to rural villages. Everything with Mongolian character or characteristics is targeted. Signs in Mongolian are taken down. Sculptures of Mongolian history are smashed. Books and publications in Mongolian are banned and confiscated. All these are part of China's greater effort to firmly inculcate the Chinese nationality, common identity, into the population of the so-called 55 ethnic minorities. We as Mongolians were shocked by this decision by Chinese government. By implementation of this program, many were persecuted in southern Mongolia because they wanted to learn and use their mother tongue. Each Mongolian person, including southern Mongolians in China, citizens of Buryatia, Kalmykia, autonomous regions in Russia, want to protect their language and cultural rights. Mongolians condemned the act of Chinese government and staged demonstrations in the world to express their displeasure. In addition, citizens of Buryatia and Kalmykia, autonomous regions in Russia, and ethnic Mongolians in different countries showed a renewed motivation to learn Mongolian language and script. In response to the ban of Mongolian language, the president of Mongolia, Haltmagin Battolab, then president of Mongolia, conducted a video lesson on the Mongolian script in late 2020. The lessons were broadcasted by major TV channels in Mongolia. It exemplifies the peaceful protest against banning minority language by Chinese government in southern Mongolia. Also, it helped to ensure the implementation of presidential decree on intensifying the use of Mongolian script and the law on Mongolian language, as well as the third national program of Mongolian script. Within the framework of this program, the goal of using the Cyrillic in parallel with Mongolian script in administrative uses should be achieved by 2025. Mongolian language and script are endangered and World Heritage by UNESCO declaration, so they must be protected. This is the wish of every Mongolian person. Linguistic culture is a means of human self-expression. Therefore, banning the use of Mongolian language in southern Mongolia is a violation of human rights. Regardless of race or culture, what people create is a universal right on heritage. Therefore, not only Mongolians, but also everyone sustains his own right to express. I would like to appeal to everyone, regardless of nationality and age, to support and to learn Mongolian script and language. I hope we continue to fight to protect heritage language and scripts in order to prevent the extinction of various cultural traits that we have been inherited by all mankind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Atagin, for your presentation about how the Mongolian language and script is being persecuted or being wiped out systematically by the Chinese government, in southern Mongolia, and how the Mongolian all over the world are trying to preserve the script, the language, which is the foundation of your culture. So thank you very much for your presentation. So now we have about 12-13 minutes left. I think I would invite questions from the floor. When you ask questions, you can direct question to the panelists who have want to ask. And please identify yourself and put this question straight and to the point without having to discuss in detail, So we just have 12 minutes left. Kindly raise your hand and identify yourself, please. Yeah, please.
Taking the opportunity, I would like to thank all the panelists for your wonderful presentation. My question would be for Dr. Michael von Roth. In the recent narratives, what we have seen is that the concept of modern colonialism is not really being picked up in the narrative. So definitely, you bringing up that concept is a very important perspective to look at the current condition in Tibet. Also, when you talk about the right to self-determination, what we have experienced is that there is a sense of hesitancy, I must say, in making distinction between internal self-determination and external self-determination, and people sort of trying to say that when it comes to the covenants, they generally refer to the internal self-determination. So that sort of dilutes when we approach the diplomats or the international organizations. So when you talk about self-determination, how do we approach this hesitancy of really talking about Tibetans, or for that matter, Uyghurs having the self-determination, and that meaning to be an external self-determination and not just the new formed concept of internal self-determination? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, which I think is a very critical one, very, very important one. I'm trying to think of a way of explaining it that doesn't take too much time and is not too complicated. I think two things. One, what I have explained is, let me say it differently. Yes, self-determination means different things in different situations in terms of what outcome is permissible. So self-determination is a process. It means a right to choose. A right to choose your political status, your relationship with another state, and a right to, as the definition says, to develop your economically, socially, culturally, free from interference from somebody else. That's why it's so important in today's discussion as well. There are some cases of self-determination where a people has a full right, what I call a full right to self-determination, what others call external right to self-determination, which means that they can decide any status, independence, association with another state, autonomy, integration with another state, anything they want. If you like, the category of peoples that have that right is limited by, political desires of countries not to have too much of that happening. And it's limited to the categories that I discussed today, which is both, and some others, but the ones that I focused on today was colonialism, but also alien subjugation, domination, exploitation by an oppressive regime. That Tibet qualifies without question. East Turkestan qualifies without question. And as I mentioned, and thanks to the question from Secretary Kamachuri, genocide makes that very clear. Nobody has to continue to live under a regime that imposes genocide. There is just no international obligation to do that. So that makes it very clear that Tibetans have that right, and that Uyghurs and other people in East Turkestan have that right. Internal self-determination means within the state you have the right to a degree of your own development, etc. Now, when you have the choice, as Tibetans have in terms of their rights, they can choose, in other words, you can choose whether the status that you want is a restoration of your independence, whether it is autonomy within another state, within the PRC, what kind of autonomy that would be, what aspects of the autonomy are important, etc. That is a choice for the Tibetans to make. And therefore there is no contradiction, as is sometimes thought, between emphasizing that Tibetans have the right to self-determination, and the middle way approach, which is to find a compromise solution somewhere in the middle between the restoration of independence and the integration that China is trying to enforce in Tibet, which is the genuine autonomy that the CTA has been talking about. There's no contradiction, because the basis for which Tibetans claim the desire for autonomy is the fact that they have the right to choose. If you don't have a right, you become a beggar that asks China, please, can you give us some favor? Can you please allow us a little bit more freedom than the other people in the PRC? On what grounds? The ground must be a solid foundation of a right. And that right is the right to self-determination, and as I will be discussing tomorrow, is the fact that Tibet is a state, is not part of China, and that you therefore have a position from which to negotiate. You have a possibility to accept to become part of the PRC in exchange for and as part of a package that allows a robust, a guaranteed, a satisfactory autonomy. But in other words, you have to have a basis from which you can negotiate. And if you're not clear on your rights, and if you do not articulate your rights strongly and expressly, your ability to negotiate erodes very quickly. I mean, most of my life, I've now, the last 30 years, spent in advising negotiating parties or in facilitating negotiations and peace processes around the world. And believe me, it is those that have a clear sense of their rights that end up with an agreement that works. And if that is somehow lost, it is extremely difficult to negotiate a satisfactory agreement. Yeah, so I hope that answers the question.
Any questions? Please, sir. Identify yourself, your name at least.
My question is also for Professor Michael. My name is Dion Jordan. I'm going to talk later in the afternoon. So my question is about self-determination. Do you think, Michael, that Corsica is also entitled for self-determination, as well as Palestinian people, as well as Scottish people, as well as the Catalonian?
I didn't think that the conference was about these particular situations. And so for the same reason that I did not comment on Hong Kong and on southern Mongolia, without prejudice to whether they do and what kind of self-determination rights they have, etc., I'd rather not comment on those. In principle, I'm a strong proponent of the right to self-determination of all peoples. But I do recognize that in different situations, the outcome of the exercise of that right can be different. But I would say that for a country like France, which has recognized the rights of the people of Southern Caledonia to choose their destiny by means of referendum, 3 referenda in fact, a country like the UK that has recognized the right of the Scottish people to choose their destiny by means of referendum, Canada has done the same, etc. I cannot understand that those countries take a different position when it comes to Tibet.
One last question, I think. Yeah, please.
Hello, I'm Tenzin Dessel from the Tibet Policy Institute. So my question is directed to Dr. Lisa. Over the years, we have seen the circulation of strong man leaders in Uyghur, in the so-called Uyghur Autonomous Region and the Tibet Autonomous Region. We can look back at Danjili for instance. How concerned should we be with the appointment of somebody who has been who you must have observed and watched very closely from your own personal experience, how concerned should Tibetans and Tibet voters should be with the appointment of the new Tibetan Party Secretary, 1 June 10?
I really don't understand the question. Can you repeat this?
So, if you have been following the news recently, one of the party members from Uyghur autonomous, so-called Uyghur autonomous region, he was appointed as the party secretary.
Yes, yes.
So we have seen over the years the circulation of strongman leadership. So you have seen and observed this very closely through your own personal experience. So how concerned should Tibetans and Tibet voters should be?
Well, this is a good point. Is Chinese government and this colonial rule and the control of Tibet, Turkestan, all the time is follow up each other. For example, Jinchendo, who was the party secretary in Tibet from 2011 to 2016, 5 years. When he was a party secretary in Tibet, he starts a re-education camp. Not so strong like Turkestan, but they are start already in Tibet. He got some experience. 2016, he was appointed in Turkestan. Then he used all experiment in Tibet. First thing is he turned whole the region is and open a prison and set up checkpoint. In the whole region, the capital of Turkestan is 960 checkpoint. He set up. He did before the Tibet, of course. And it's been every 200-300 meters is one police monitor station. Then later, slowly, he tested voice recognition, facial recognition camera developed. And in Turkestan, they use Tibet and Hong Kong, some other place. And now is another guy one who is appointed the party secretary in Tibet. He is the one of the guys, Communist Party member who's sanctioned by the European Union. Yes, because he is the one of the very responsible and the complicity guys for the Uyghur genocide. So now is the Chinese government all the time international media presents. Oh look, last 4-5 years, not single violation was happening in Xinjiang. They are saying no terrorism was happening in Xinjiang. Well, so maybe this is the good point. So international must be attention for this. Maybe this guy use the same experience from Turkestan, then maybe next year, and maybe another 3-4 million Tibetan put the concentration camp and start the genocide. Not control genocide, really ethnic cleansing and the genocide will happen in Tibet. This is the very serious case. Yeah, so the Chinese government sometimes some Chinese leaders from Tibet to Turkestan, sometimes from Turkestan to Tibet, is exchange. This main purpose is completely and eradicated and the Uyghur and Tibet identity. This is the main core of the Chinese government.
Thank you. Now we are completed our time, and lest we miss our lunch. So thank you very much, Dr. Michael Tenchula, Mr. Dalton Isa, and Hamilton. For participating in this particular panel discussion, and thank you very much the members in the audience for being attentive and for being very interactive during this session. And we have many more panel discussions to follow, at least 3 more for this day and tomorrow. And so we hope that you will continue to be with us for the next 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And on behalf of the Geneva Forum organizing team, may I request Representative Chinu Rizingla to kindly present Kata and the book Tibet Drift 2020 to all our panelists for wonderful presentation and your contribution to the 4th Geneva Forum. Thank you so much.
Yes, so fly back. Thank you so
lunch break for 90 minutes. Kindly get back to the conference hall for the second panel at 14:30. Thank you.
Yeah.